viewing this through video or just having us play in the background, we do appreciate your presence. I think you're in for a wonderful conversation, both a presentation from our speaker and a back and forth with Rabbi Sari Laufer when she joins us. So I want to really begin with thanks. Thanks to Rabbi Sari Laufer, to Andrea Sonnenberg, to Vicki George, who's behind the scenes making sure that our technology works, for all of your support and all that you do, all the three of you. Rabbi Sari Laufer is a valued colleague, and Andrea Sonnenberg is a dear friend. And a special thank you to Maryanne O'Hara for the beautiful book that she's going to speak about today, as well as her life story in the book and her daughter's life story, and for making the time to be with us and sharing her insights. Before I hand it over to Andrea, I just want to talk a little bit about the Bradley Sonnenberg Wellness Series, really from the perspective of one of the rabbis at Stephen Weiss Temple. I'm Ron Stern. I'm one of those rabbis. In Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, he asserts that we can't control many of the things that happen to and around us in our lives. But what we have a great deal of control over is how we respond. When Bradley died in December of 2017, the Sonnenbergs' worst nightmare came true. And this happened despite their best efforts, despite their love for Bradley, despite the support he received from his family and community and the professionals that they marshaled to offer him strength and support and guidance as he battled his own emotional distress. But sadly, his life was cut short. And for them and for the family, the world truly came crashing down. And if I use the word devastating, it doesn't really describe what they felt. And I've known them for a long time, and I witnessed it, and it was devastating for even those of us in the circle that surround them. Really, it was a cataclysm. And in truth, it was beyond anyone's control in the classic way that Viktor Frankl defines it. But what's amazing about my dear friends the Sonnenbergs is that from that dark night, and always carrying the pain of his loss in their very being, it never goes away, as I'm sure you're going to hear tonight. Andrea and Glenn and their children, Lauren and Jake, the survivors of the family, have made incredible meaning of Brad's life, their memories of him, their lessons from his death, and really for themselves and in his name. They have done so much good after their loss across such a range of grateful organizations, and to benefit so many deeply appreciated people that in truth, it defies comprehension. And Stephen Weiss Temple is among the many recipients of the Sonnenbergs' own search for meaning and of their capacity to make meaning from this painful loss. The Wellness Series is just the tip of the Sonnenberg iceberg, two bergs in a row, but it's the way it works. The Sonnenberg iceberg of Tikkun Olam that they do in Bradley's name, so many things. And we, the community of Stephen Weiss, the clergy of Stephen Weiss, all of us who benefit are so deeply grateful and proud to offer this program to our community. And I am proud to call Andrea one of my closest friends. And so with that, I turn the microphone and the video over to Andrea as she continues with our program.
Thank you, Rabbi Stern, as I'm wiping the tears away from my eyes. As Maryanne can relate to, something that never goes away, but things like this are what help us keep his memory alive and make meaning out of the tragedy that we experienced. So I am excited to share the next speaker for the Bradley Sonnenberg Wellness Series at Stephen Weiss Temple, the initiative that Glenn and I created in memory of our beloved Bradley. Bradley was a young man lost too soon as the result of the interaction of prescription drugs taken as prescribed for depression. A reminder of the complexity of treating problems of mental illness. Brad was fascinated by the meaty questions of why we are here, what is the purpose of life, and how does one live a good life. He found a way to express his thoughts through music, both vocal music and musical theater, as well as through his writings. And our family has made it a mission to tell the story not only of Brad, but other people who have experienced life's challenges and have stories of resilience to share with all of us. This speaker series is but one example of these efforts. Previously, we were fortunate to hear from Diane Shader Smith, who I believe is in the audience. So shout out to Diane tonight, who also lost a child, a daughter, after a long battle with cystic fibrosis. So continuing with this year's theme of resilience, of turning pain into purpose, we will hear from another mother who lost a child and used her child's legacy to help others, Maryanne O'Hara. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Maryanne, and then we'll get to hear from her, her story and about her beautiful book. So she's the author of the book entitled Little Matches, a memoir of grief and light. And it's inspired by 9livenotes.com, which is a blog that Maryanne kept while her daughter, Caitlyn, was waiting for a lung transplant. Maryanne and Caitlyn's story have been featured in the New York Times, Time Magazine, Boston Globe, Psychology Today, and as a People Magazine Book of the Week. She holds an MFA in creative writing, has taught creative writing at Emerson College and Clark University, and was a longtime editor at the literary journal Plowshares. She's also the author of an award-winning novel, Cascade, many short stories, and is a recipient of literary grants from the Massachusetts Cultural Council and the St. Botolph Club Foundation. After volunteering as an end-of-life volunteer at care facilities in Boston and Pittsburgh, she became an end-of-life doula certified at UVM's Lerner College of Medicine in 2019. She lectures on topics including chronic illness, bereavement, and secular spirituality, and is the developer of a legacy writing workshop that facilitates personal and communal reflective creative practices across identity, age, and health status. Caitlyn was her only child, and she and her husband, Nicholas, live near Boston, and she's actually out in LA now. So fortunately, she's on West Coast time with us here. I just wanted to let you know that when we're done, we are going, when Maryanne is done, we're going to have a Q&A moderated by Rabbi Sari. So you can put your questions in the chat, and she will address those questions, and Maryanne will answer them for us. So without further ado, Maryanne, we welcome you, and floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and both rabbis. I am really honored to be here tonight and to be part of this great work you're doing on behalf of mental wellness, which is just so important and needs to be talked about. So I have a presentation to show you. We have a lot of visuals, and I'm going to hide myself so that you can focus on them. And I'm going to share my screen and start my program. After I lost my daughter, Caitlyn, I looked for revelation. I became every human who has ever looked for answers to the hard questions. Where is she? Is she? Is there more to life than this life? Does consciousness survive death? Does my existence serve any real purpose? Does anyone's? So I wrote little matches from inside real-time grief, and I asked those big life questions. Caitlyn became a real sage for all of us. She had so much wisdom. And the last couple of years, while she was waiting for her lung transplant and she was on oxygen, it was easier to write than to speak. After her passing, many of her friends shared her writing with me, including text messages, conversations that would have been lost forever were recorded. So all of her old soul wisdom is in the book in a really cool way. I know I'm not the first person to lose what's most important to me. Humans lose all the time, and lose hard. Little Matches is for anyone who loses and asks, now what? And there she is, Caitlyn. When I lost her, I told myself that the only way I could survive the pain was if I knew I would see her again. Problem was, I couldn't let myself believe that I would. I tried. I devoured the kinds of books she and I sometimes like to read and discuss. We called them soul books. We Don't Die,
Many Lives, Many Masters, The Light Between Us. Those particular books were intelligently written, credible, and they provided comfort in the moment. Yes, they said, we birth into this life knowing at a soul level our life's plan. Yes, there is more to life than this life. But when I closed them, I was a human mother, sick with doubt and grief. In my fiction, I had always explored existential themes, but in a ruminating sort of way. It wasn't until I was living inside unbearable grief that answers became necessary. I had grown up the oldest of 6 children in a chaotic family with too much child tending left to me. I never really wanted kids, yet I found myself married and unexpectedly pregnant at a young age. I worried I might not bond with my baby, but the parenting books told me not to worry about that not everyone bonds right away. So I didn't worry. I was young enough that I didn't worry about anything. When Caitlyn was born, she cried and cried like a little cat while they scooped her away and weighed her and wrapped her in a blanket. She was still crying when the nurse placed her in my arms. I said her name. Hi, Caitlyn. She stopped crying and went very still, as if she were listening. She knows who you are, said the nurse. I honestly felt rapture then, and deep, deep love. It was immediate and it was forever. 2 years into life, she was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, a terminal lung disease that can be invisible for a long time. On the outside, she looked like anyone else, but emergencies we would discover would be frequent and unexpected. We would learn the rhythms of life inside the hospital. I've been writing since I was old enough to hold a pen. My instinct always to document, so I have records. All these years later, it's easy to page through those early days, to read about the grief so heavy it hurt to breathe, to remember that I truly believed we could not possibly ever be happy again. This photo was taken the day after her diagnosis at a little kid's birthday party. I was in such pain, but you can't tell. So much of what we humans suffer with is invisible. CF predisposes those who have it to frequent infections that destroy lung tissue, but it's usually a slow process, as it was with Caitlyn. She was able to live a pretty normal existence, at least on the outside, for most of her life. And the good news was that the prognosis for CF kept improving. Scientists discovered the CF gene, lifespan increased, new treatments came along. And very early on, I learned to compartmentalize, to put CF in a box. I had a saying, let's not ruin today, worrying about tomorrow. Every day we did everything humanly possible to keep Caitlyn healthy. But if we weren't in crisis mode, we otherwise tuned CF out. Living with this perspective meant that Caitlyn had never defined herself by her disease as she grew up. She was friendly, she excelled in academics, art, and in the early years, when she still had the breath for it, sports. She was a happy child who grew into an independent adult and enjoyed healthy relationships. Like so many people who live with serious health issues, she was reflective. She gave a lot of thought to questions of meaning and purpose. She wondered, what is my role in this lifetime? We talked a lot about those bigger issues. She often joked that if she hadn't had CF, she might have been shallow, which was her modest way of pointing out that she didn't think she was special. It was just that having to face your mortality makes you look at life and the world with a much broader and deeper perspective. She was right. People who face trauma, illness, or severe loss often find themselves transformed and come to question or better understand what life is really for. Fortunately, as two human beings who happened to be mother and daughter, we were lucky. We clicked, and our conversations, even when she was young, were often rich and philosophical. But I had no strong faith through her growing up years. My upbringing was Christian, yet even as a kid, I'd felt myself to be an agnostic with a lot of questions. Since childhood, I had had a singular thought in the back of my mind. We find ourselves here. We humans find ourselves alive with no explanation. Long ago, we emerged from our caves and turned so much of the natural world into everything that we now take for granted. But essentially, we are simple. We are cycle after cycle of creatures who are born, who live, and who die. We made sure that Caitlyn leaned into the magic of our brief human existence, that we exposed her to art and books and music and travel, the good in this life. If she woke in the night coughing, I'd say, let's see which stars are out tonight. I raised her to honor the good in all religions, to keep an open mind, and to always, always question what didn't resonate with her soul. I probably needn't have worried. Caitlyn's North Star was always, instinctively, goodness. As a child, she had been innately kind in a way I was not when I was young, and I always marveled at that. Where had that goodness come from? In the fire that was there from the beginning. There was fire, thank goodness, always. She was a rebel and a champion of underdogs, and I was grateful for her grit, her ability to face whatever needed facing. And of course, we were in all philosophy and seriousness and such. We enjoyed nonsense and guilty pleasures, and we had our share of fights. In short, we lived as regular of a life as we could. But CF is an invisible illness, and life can change overnight. The first bad time was when she was 11. Until then, her CF had been manageable. Then a routine admission discovered that a slow-growing organism had destroyed the lower lobe of her left lung. Left unchecked, that organism would have spread and ultimately killed her. The only way to save her was with a lobectomy, Frankenstein language, major surgery that would cut away the ruined lobe and hopefully stop the spread. During the lead up to surgery, when I was alone in the house, I succumbed to despair. I lay on my living room sofa, staring at the ceiling, sobbing. I was on that sofa one bright winter morning when I heard a voice, strong and quite clear, a low female voice. It said, "Have faith." I sat up. I blinked and looked around at the furniture, the bookshelves, the windows, doors. I thought about how easy it would be to doubt what I had heard. Surgery was a success, but post-op, her lung refused to heal. Months passed as she lay trapped in a hospital bed, attached to a suctioning device that kept a steady vacuum pressure on her lung to keep it inflated and help it heal. We canceled the summer adventure in Paris that was to have been the lobectomy's reward. From her 9th floor room, she could see ball games at Fenway Park, and one night, 4th of July fireworks. Caitlyn always said she stopped being a kid that year. In my own journal, I wrote, "If she dies, I can kill myself." The plan was a comfort and allowed me to postpone the paralysis of true despair. After 5 months, inexplicably and really rather miraculously, she did heal and we returned to our lives. But living had become both more precious and more fraught. 6 months could go by uneventfully, but we always knew it could change overnight, and many times it did. We learned to buy trip insurance, and we learned to pivot. Pulmonary exacerbations forced her to transfer from college in Washington, D.C., back home to Boston. We learned to never bank on anything planned beyond today. But that was okay. Today's are good. We all got it today, this morning, didn't we? Decline was gradual. Day to day, you wouldn't notice, but over the years, she went from being this fast little runner in elementary school to a recreational sort of walker in college, to finally having to move to a building with an elevator once stair climbing became too difficult. She adapted. As humans, we are coded to adapt. Writing to a school friend she reconnected with later in life, she talked about how tricky her 20s had been. It wasn't so bad that I couldn't fake it and kind of live normally, But I also couldn't strike out and do something bold. It really was this constant picking and choosing of battles, fun, etc. As her mother, I found it to be the most painful time to watch your child live with the restrictions of serious illness. During her senior year of college, she reached the point that she needed to use oxygen to sleep and to fly. But to the outside world, she still looked completely healthy. She wanted so badly to join the Peace Corps. Her doctor said absolutely not. So she took advantage of what she could do. She interned at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, graduated magna cum laude from Boston College, worked at an art gallery, and began a graphic design career that allowed her to work at her own slow pace. She and I even managed a couple of trips that we miraculously did not have to cancel. Italy one summer, an apartment in Paris the next spring. But exacerbations were becoming more frequent and her lung function numbers slowly declined. During these years, she stumbled across the research into reincarnation that scholars at the University of Virginia have been doing for decades. What interested her most, she wrote, was the idea that we are here to learn lessons in this life, figure out what those lessons are, be good people, and evolve our souls. She began reading the philosophers more closely, especially interested in people who were, as she said, intelligent and intellectual, and yet still very religious. She kept Tolstoy's A Confession bedside and read it many times over the years, bolstered by his ultimate acceptance of the paradox of faith. We talked about the concept of surrender and how the moments when she felt most free, most okay with whatever was happening, and least anxious were those moments when she was able to let go and surrender. I learned so much from her. She applied to a Master of Philosophy program and came close to enrolling until she realized that it didn't make a whole lot of sense to do so when it was clear her health was in serious decline. These photos marked the last day she ever went out into the world without supplemental oxygen. Within 24 hours of them being taken, she was hospitalized. And she had reached the point that she needed a lung transplant. We entered into the limbo of waiting for a donor. For certain discriminatory reasons I won't go into, we had to leave our home in Boston and move to Pittsburgh to wait for surgery. Having to move to another city where we knew no one indefinitely was tough, tougher than this smile of hers makes it look. We hoped the transplant would happen within a few months, and we had every reason to hope that once she did receive her surgery, she would survive it. In fact, she waited for 2.5 years, and in the end, everything that could go wrong did. She existed, and then she did not. We people take up space, and when we're gone, there is a void. There is no rudder in that void, no anchor, no sail, no purpose. The novel I'd been writing, meaningless. She was our only child, my person. I didn't think I would be able to live. The only thing that helped in those dark days was writing on a blog I'd kept in Pittsburgh. It helped me feel connected to other people and to Caitlyn herself. I shared her writings and my own. I wrote about how all I could do was flop from one surface to another and cry. That on the outside, I might have looked like I was functioning, but inside, I was on the floor. About how I would happily die if it wasn't scary and hard to do. I wasn't all despair and gloom, not at all. I wrote about our lifelong friendship, about our love of travel, and how we had lived on laughter, that great release valve, especially in the hospital. And about all that reflecting we had done on the reason anyone was alive in the first place. Writing on the blog was a way of grieving out loud, grieving in a way that other people apparently wanted to hear. I received a lot of messages from strangers who asked me to write a book. I had never been interested in writing the personal. But 9 months after her passing, during a walk around Walden Pond, I realized that writing the personal was the only thing that mattered anymore. I knew I needed to write from smack inside the reel of it. I needed to create a record. I wanted anyone reading it to understand how it was. And if they were going through something hard, to feel validated, to be able to say, yes, this is how it is, and to know they weren't alone. And for readers who weren't struggling, I wanted Caitlyn's story to inspire. I was also conscious of the tendency of human memory to beatify a person in the years after death. So I didn't want to wait. I wanted to write Caitlyn as she really was, write our story as it really had been. Who she was in real life was splendid enough. I wanted to share her wisdom, her humor, her example. I wanted to keep her alive. In the beginning stages, it felt impossible. It took me 2 months to write 10 pages. Then I began to set a timer and write for half an hour each day. The book became a book. It became my purpose for living. As I wrote, I really did become every human who has ever looked for answers to those big life questions inside of books and science and in the natural world and inside of relationships. My writing became a recounting of my search. Where is she? Is she? Is there more to life than this life? Does my existence have any real purpose? Does anyone's? The thought of any part of Caitlyn existing beyond the physical death of the body seemed desperate, wishful thinking. I knew what I was, a vulnerable, grieving mother. There is an arc to a human life. It begins and it ends. But what happened was that I kept receiving what seemed to be signs. Hawks, in particular, began behaving in ways I had never witnessed, perching on the roof of my house to fly right over my head when I opened the door, veering so close to my windshield that I had to jerk the wheel. Caitlyn was 33, and I began seeing 33 and 333 everywhere. On clocks, when I looked at them, 33 minutes or 33 miles to every destination I plugged into the GPS. Her Instagram account, 333 posts, receipts, 3303. My brokenhearted announcement from the day after she died, 133 comments. Her Facebook, 1,333 friends. Her boyfriend's street address, 33. I reasoned that if you begin to look for things, you see them. You look for your husband's red jacket in an airport crowd, and your eyes see all the red there is to see. I was well aware that my antenna was up, ready to notice the slightest meaningful coincidence. I must be unconsciously looking for 333, I would tell myself, just as it whizzed past on a license plate, and sometimes even found a way to say hi. Synchronicities continued, visiting a tarot reader in LA and pulling the Ace of Cups, the card of love and renewal and rebirth, then walking directly into a boutique across the street where a single t-shirt was for sale, folded to reveal the Ace of Cups imagery I had just held in my palm, and where a customer stood spelling out her name for the cashier, Caitlin. Synchronicities that I originally dismissed as coincidences or odd occurrences began to pile up to the point that I realized that discounting them was a bit myopic. And when I shared these stories, the most unlikely people would share back. The cat that dropped dead, literally, during a mother's funeral, and the random stranger who told the daughter years later, I'm supposed to tell you, your mother's fine, the cat's with her. Nurses who tend to the dying will tell you that end-of-life dreams and visions are part of the natural dying experience, excuse me, always have been. The mother who says to her family gathered round, you're gonna think I'm crazy, but my sister's here. The way Steve Jobs looked past his loved ones and said, oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow. So many unlikely people shared stories that I began to think, there's more to all this than most people are talking about. So I began to read the science community's explorations of the source of consciousness. I braced myself, thinking there would be hard proof that consciousness could not survive the death of the body. Instead, I discovered that science calls consciousness the hard problem. What was clear was that many people throughout time have experienced unexplainable phenomena. 100 years ago, a man named Eden Philpotts wrote, "The universe is full of magical things, patiently waiting for our wits to grow sharper." So much of what we take for granted is made of discoveries that would have seemed completely fantastical, even frightening, not very long ago. Here is what I came to know. Synchronicities exist. Regardless of what you believe to be the source of synchronicities, the marvelous thing is they do exist, and they're fun. They're part of the magic of this life we find ourselves living. I'll share one. To give you context, this is a view of Martha's Vineyard, one of Caitlyn's favorite places. It was the summer after her passing, and I decided to drive out to the far end of the island, down Lobsterville Road, which is this skinny stretch of pavement, to reenact the last time she and I were on island and had driven all the way out there. Even in the middle of summer, it's a part of the island where you rarely see other people, just long, empty stretches of beach. I decided to drive all the way to the end like I had with Caitlyn that day, where the road ends at a boat ramp. As I drove, I was talking to her in my head, saying things like, "Why can't we communicate if you're really out there?" I tried to remind myself of all the validations I'd been receiving, but I felt so jammed inside Earth's physical plane. A tangible afterlife was fantasy. She was gone. There was nothing else. I would never see her again. "I loved you from the first minute," I said out loud, and I was crying by that point. No one will ever call me mom again. I turned into the dead-end area where the road stopped at the water, and there he was, a guy who was all by himself out there, carrying a burlap bag with 3 big red letters on its side, an acronym for mom. Synchronicities exist, and they can comfort you. And I'm going to take a sip of water. In a letter Caitlyn wrote, musing about human lives on our planet Earth, she said, "This place is like a ropes course for souls, a learning center. It never changes, and the collective body of humans can never sustain their progress too much, or else there is not enough to challenge the souls." That point of view happens to make sense to me as well. But regardless of what we believe or think we believe, it can be instructive to take a moment to just imagine it's true, that we chose these lives, planned these courses of events in order to challenge ourselves to grow. Can we look back on our lives and pick out which events tested us in such a way that we can be grateful for them because we grew? What I have come to believe is most true is this: that purpose in life is necessary and probably a prerequisite to joy and contentment. During her final summer, Caitlyn shared a secret fear: that her purpose here on this earth was to die, to teach lessons to others. After her passing, I felt the same, that my purpose was to write our story. Finding one's purpose is a meaningful way to find light inside the dark. An activity that had always helped me to feel content and purposeful was volunteering. So in late 2019, I trained as an end-of-life doula, who is someone who provides support and comfort to humans as they approach death. I knew the training would help me better speak to the state of end-of-life care in this country, which I am doing with 2 other medical memoirists. We are speaking from our 3 perspectives: patient, parent, provider, at hospitals and to grand rounds programs, offering a model of collaboration that illustrates the power of personal narrative to improve healthcare. I also use my storytelling skills to conduct workshops to encourage people to conduct life interviews with loved ones or even with themselves. Life interviews are a great way for people to reflect on their lives and shape their life stories, regardless of age or current health. In the last blog post Caitlyn ever wrote, she said, "I want to reassure you, I don't take myself too seriously. I do take life seriously, though, I'll be honest, because it's a seriously wild business." It is a seriously wild business. I told myself that the only way I could survive the loss of Caitlyn was if I knew I would see her again. By looking for purpose and finding it, by asking questions, I found myself some answers, and I am surviving.
So I'm just giving everyone a minute to sit with your words, Maryanne. And I said this to Maryanne earlier, but first I just want to thank you. I said this both for sharing Caitlyn and yourself and these words with us. And I really, I was telling her, it's just it is a gorgeous book. As a lot of you know, my dad died earlier this year, and I felt like it was just sort of this gift given to me as I was reading it. And I know I think I underlined something on every page, and I have lots of questions. So,
Okay.
so what I'm going to do, if it's okay with everyone, I'm going to start asking some of the questions that I'd written down over the course of reading it, and as you were speaking also. But as Rabbi Stern said, and as Andrea said, please, if you have questions, I think there's two ways you can share them. You can share them into the Q&A, or you can share them into the chat. And I'm happy to sort of ask them as they come in. So I don't even know where to start. So I'll start with actually like some of the overarching pieces and then get into some more like, I guess, specific questions.
Okay.
You know, at least where I read it, and I want to frame this like in the calendar of my tradition. So this week is the week of Sukkot, which is our harvest festival. We traditionally, you dwell in a hut for the week. And I actually, like, again, synchronicities, wrote this morning for our synagogue community about a debate the rabbis have between whether they're like actual physical structures or if they are theoretical, sort of metaphysical structures of God representing the divine. And as I was reading your book, I thought a lot about that tension or the space between certainty and uncertainty. I feel like you write a lot about it. And so I'm curious, like, where do you feel like you dwell now in that continuum?
Well, there are so many kinds of uncertainty. And one thing that we certainly lived with for 31 years, once Caitlyn was diagnosed, was the uncertainty of prognosis. And living with uncertainty is such a hard thing it's a really hard thing to live with. And so I found that I had to find ways of being a functioning, happy person. And that meant saying, okay, well, I'm not going to ruin today, worrying about tomorrow or the past. And I was compartmentalizing, but it really helped me. And yet when I lost her, you know, everything that we had theorized about answers were necessary. And I really did need to come to find answers for myself. So the whole arc of the book is really me looking for answers to whether she still exists. And I came to a conclusion for myself, pretty much. So I feel like, but I still live with that uncertainty. I think it's part of our human condition. We just really don't know. And we won't know until we die, or that'll be the end of it. You know, I think I referred to the Benjamin Button story in the book. You know, if we really do go on to something, then I imagine the next life to be this wonderful feeling of, oh, thank God that earthly life is over. And if not, then it just sort of ends. So uncertainty is something we just have to live with, I think.
Yeah. Great.
And make our peace with it.
Or at least just sort of sit with it.
Exactly.
No.
I think that nature is the best remedy for almost any kind of trauma, uncertainty, grief. I found that getting out into, I was saying earlier to you that right after her funeral. I had never been to California, and I just had this need to come out here and see the Pacific and see the giant redwoods and just feel like I was part of something way bigger than me.
Yeah, there's a beautiful an ancient rabbinic story that we've told about Adam and Eve, right? They're basically their first night in the Garden of Eden, where they have eaten from the tree, so they still sort of have a little bit of knowledge, but not a big body. And as the sun goes down, Adam starts to basically freak out and is like, "What's going on? Why is the world getting dark? Did I do something wrong?" Right? Like that deep uncertainty and fear, and then he like basically stays up all night panicking. I'm sure you can't identify with that at all. And then wakes, and then in the morning starts to see the sunrise and is like, okay, maybe there's something here. And it happens a couple of times until finally, right, it's nature that answers him.
Yes.
And he sort of says like, okay, like there is a certainty, right? I might not be certain, but there like are these larger truths around.
There's a pattern here.
Right, exactly.
Something bigger than me.
Right.
I love that.
Yeah. There's a great question, Billy. I see your question. I'm going to hold it for a little bit later, but I do see it. I wanted to ask, I even wrote down the page that later in the book, I think it's when you visited one of the mediums, and like one of the messages that she brought, or like Caitlyn sent through her, was the idea that you had to learn to live with her in a different way. And I loved the language of that. And it's something I've thought for a long time, of this idea that whatever we believe about an afterlife, like relationships don't end.
Right.
And so I'm curious, like, how do you feel like your relationship with Caitlyn has changed or deepened, over these years? Right, it's 5 years. It'll be 5 years.
It will be 5 years in December, which seems completely impossible, but true. Yes, and that is so true. Your relationship doesn't end, and you do have to. It's up to you on this side to figure out a way to live with the person, the memory of the person. And I do feel like she's with me. It was really funny today. I was walking around Santa Monica, and I kept having these like flashbacks of memories of Caitlyn being with us at certain places where we had been. And of course it was after her funeral, but she was so with us that I realized, well, she really was with us. We've carried her everywhere. Grief doesn't end. The timeline of grief is certainly not linear. And I've learned that grief and joy can coexist. They have to, if you're going to be a functioning person, and respecting the life that you still have. So I will always be grieving her, and I still cry all the time, but I'm functioning and I love talking about her, and I'm a happy person. So, and I do believe that finding purpose really makes a big difference. And I think for people, purpose doesn't have to be anything grand, but finding something that you really, if it's really true that, as all the sages have said forever, that we're here to love each other. That's why we're here. That's why we are humans. We are here to love each other. And if you take that as like your main human purpose, and then figure out, well, what do I really like to do that I can do for like other people, or share with other people, but I can show my love for other people. And in that way, you sort of like make yourself feel purposeful and content. And you're serving that larger purpose. I think if I had just holed up and shut the door on my life, I would be miserable. And what good would that be doing? I'm so happy that people know about Caitlyn and she's changing lives.
But I imagine that temptation is still there, right? To sort of shut the door. And
oh yeah, I get seriously depressed quite often. And I think it's an important thing to talk about, especially during this wellness series. I mean, everything I said in that, I wanted to die, too much of a chicken. I really did. It was so painful and horrible. I was very close to her. And, when you have a sick kid, you usually do develop that kind of relationship, but she was great.
One of the things I was thinking as I was reading it is like your love shines through, but I think I have very young kids, so I'm still sort of developing that, but like you also got, it is so clear how much you liked each other.
We did.
Right. And I think that, isn't like the love you talked about sort of comes, but like it was clear how much you liked each other, and
really
that was
liked
delightful to read, actually.
Yeah, like truly one of, I never wanted to be like buddy. I was always a parent, but we really were, especially by the time she was an adult, we were so close, really close friends. And it's a friendship that I miss constantly.
Yeah.
Constant.
So Diane in the chat, not Diane Smith, a different Diane, asked the question. She asked, so I'm going to ask her question and then add to it so you can answer sort of in full. She says sort of, why is grief towards a loved one so difficult to let go? And I have sort of two questions. I'm going to ask just one and then maybe another one. That in the beginning, Caitlyn talks a lot about, or not a lot, you have some writing from her about not giving up.
Mm-hmm.
And then later in the book, I wrote down on page 293, you're talking about grief.
Mm-hmm.
And you say it doesn't get better, it just gets different. I think it was actually something that you said to Diane Smith, if I'm not mistaken.
It was right here in California that I said that.
And so I think this is sort of another maybe iteration of Diane's question of like, why is grief so difficult to let go? I'm curious for you, I know what my answer would be, but does acceptance, and I don't even know if that's the right word, mean closure, or does it mean integrating grief into life? Right? Like, do you ever let go of grief?
For me, it's integrating grief into life. And one thing, when I took that end of life doula class, I sort of marched into it thinking, well, here I am, I'm the expert on grief. And I mean, my goodness, of course, I learned that I'm only an expert in my own grief. Everyone's journey is personal, and everyone's grief journey is as personal as they are and as unique as they are. One thing I was sort of guilty of this myself, if somebody, and I write about it in the book, if somebody had had a child who say died, 10 or 20 years ago, I sort of thought, well, they were doing okay by now. No. Like, I cannot believe it's going to be 5 years. And I met a woman not long after Caitlyn died, whose son had died like 37 years before. And she said, the pain is still here. Of course. And as soon as I had lost her, I knew that to be true. And I think for people who haven't had really horrible grief, just knowing that grief lasts forever, like love lasts forever. They're both parts of the same spectrum. We
can't have one without the other.
You really can. You don't grieve something you don't love. So yeah, for me, it's integrated. Absolutely.
Yeah, Norah Mcgraney, who I quote a lot on grief. I don't know if you've come across her writing. She talks a lot, and I thought it was interesting because you used some of this language also, right? You sort of talked about not going back to what was, and that you could only move forward. And that's her whole TED talk actually is about the whole idea when people will be like, well, it seems like you're moving on, and she's like, you never move on. No. She says you move forward, and I felt that in your book also, that you sort of talked about, like the end of your book talked about like, what does moving forward look like?
Exactly. Yeah, I wouldn't want to move on. I mean, I would hope that if it was reversed and I had died, I know that she would have grieved me forever. I mean, it's kind of sad to think that someone's going to move on from one's death.
Right. I mean, I think for me, it also is this idea that like the relationship lasts forever. And so why wouldn't, like, the grief is part of that. Just like the laughter and the love, right? They're all part and parcel.
They truly are.
So I'm going to ask a question from Billy, who put it in the question, and I think it's similar to a question I was going to ask, and I like the way he phrased it. So he says, "Thank you for sharing. It was a beautiful presentation." And he says, "I love the idea of purpose beyond identifying one's purpose or rope's course of lessons on this earth plane. Is there anything else that you now know to be true, especially anything that surprises you or that you never thought you would know to be true?
Well, the title of the book was almost, for a long time, it had a few titles, but it was Knowing. And one thing that I have always known is that there is a certain kind of knowing, and you can't learn it. You can't be taught what you really know deep down. And I have really learned to trust that more and more. So what I now know to be true is just for me. Everyone has to come ask their own questions and find their own answers if they're seeking answers to questions. And I think that we all know what it feels like to truly know something, no matter what anyone else says. And that to me, that is something that I find very comforting now, that that it has nothing to do with anyone else, that it's my way. I've had to learn how to live in this world post Caitlyn, and I feel like I've figured it out for myself. And I share and show people what I did and how I went through it. And I hope it's a nice example for someone else to go on their own journey.
I have so many more questions, and also be conscious of time. So I'm going to ask 3 more, but 2 I think are very short. At least the last one is very short. I mean, it's interesting, you have you have some writing about functioning versus living, which I thought was really interesting. And you've used both tonight. And I want to be like, hey, but it feels like you're now living, right? Like with the grief, but more than just sort of functioning in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I also, this is not a comparison at all, but I think these past 18 months or whatever, however long this has been going on, right? I think the world has gotten a little bit of a taste of like that space between functioning and living. So I just, I don't know that that's a question. I guess that's a statement. So at one point, and I think it was in the book, while Caitlyn was listed, I don't remember if it was early in the waiting or late in the waiting game, but you say that waiting let us live with hope.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, this is the harder question. The next one. Do you think you live with hope now?
I have hope that there is more beyond this little earthly human body existence. That's a kind of nice hope.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that, like I said in that one slide showing all the, the plane and everything that we take for granted is what would have been called magic not very long ago. And who knows what else is out there? I find it fascinating, and it's wonderful to think about, because just the fact that we exist is mind-blowing. So my mind is quite open.
I'm going to make sure we have no other questions from the group. I will say, like, my guess, not putting words in anyone who's watching mouth, but I know I really had to, like, your words were so beautifully crafted, both in the writing and in the presentation. I am imagining a lot of people are just sort of sitting with it. I had the luxury of getting to sit with it and
Right.
meditate on it. So I feel like, in an hour or so, people are gonna be like, wait, now I want to ask.
I'm like that myself. I don't like to talk about a movie after I've seen it. I like to reflect.
Yeah, I had that luxury.
I must say, I saw a photo of your beautiful temple and how wonderful it would be to be there in person. I hope maybe someday.
I don't know what your plans are, but Friday night, maybe Andrea and Glenn.
Well, Diane Shader-Smith has she's taken over my calendar while I'm here.
Diane, you can come too. You guys can all come Friday night.
But it's beautiful, and thank you so much. I wish I could see the people who are out there, but thank you so much for coming tonight. It's been funny to launch a book on Zoom and not to be able to connect with people. I love to speak to people in person, and I wish I could see all your faces, but thank you very much.
So I have one last question before I turn it back over to Andrea for any closing. When's the last time you saw a hawk?
All the time. It happens all the time, literally. I actually, before I left Boston, before I left home the other day, I don't go to the cemetery that often because I don't really feel like she's there. But I just had this urge to go in before I left. And of course I saw a hawk. I mean, it's just like,
So I guess she was there in that moment.
yeah, I mean, I think she sensed those synchronicities happen all the time. Like to the point of absurdity, but it's fun. And some of them are really quite amazing. Like that license plate that said 333 high happened immediately after something really meaningful happened, and this car pulled in front of me and I was like, whoa, I love it. Thank you.
Right.
Whoever made this happen. Thank you.
Beautiful. Well, so I'm going to turn it back over to Andrea, but really, like I just, like I said, I think both the time in my own life and this idea that we're in this holiday that honors like the intersection of vulnerability and strength. And I feel like that is both what you gave us in this book. And it sounds like, you know, sort of how you, and I think in a lot of ways, how Caitlyn lived in the world. So I cannot thank you enough. And Andrea, thank you for bringing this beautiful book and Maryanne into our community. I'm just going to hold it up. Everyone should read it. It really is stunning.
Thank you.
See all of my notes pushed through, but thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maryanne. That was such a beautiful tribute to your daughter, to her life, and to all of us for healing and for answering life's difficult questions. It was really beautiful and powerful. And I love looking for hawks, and you know, I look for lizards. Little lizards are my symbol. So I love hearing that other people have their symbols and the things that they look for. So I really can't thank you enough. Diane mentioned in the chat that you guys are speaking. The reference that Maryanne made to the talk that she's doing from 3 perspectives, where it's the patient, the parent, and the provider, that there actually is that talk is happening via Zoom, I believe, though, but at Cedars-Sinai, coming up on the 29th, I believe, at noon. So if people have any interest in that, they can reach out to Diane, myself, or Maryanne, or the temple, or Stephen Weiss Temple, and we can give you more information on that. But you can hear, you know, a different perspective on the book and into the patient care, a way to sort of help with patient care, and a different angle at looking at how we can receive the best experience for treatment in all areas of treatment, not just in the CF world. So,
Indeed.
Yeah, so I just wanted to invite everyone to that. I wanted to thank everyone for joining. Thank you for being supportive of this program. We're excited for it to continue. And I'm seeing like nice little notes in the chat. Rabbi, sorry for the loss of your dad. Anyway, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Maryanne. This was lovely.
Thank you so much.
Your book is lovely. And
thank you.
I look forward to working together in the future.
Thank you so much. It was an honor to be here. I really appreciate it.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for signing in.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.